ago, where, Parker, to his credit, is being very careful with this COVID thing. And actually,
Michael, can you give me some indication of when we have sufficient board members on for a quorum?
We're checking right now.
We're checking now.
James Parker's making up the list.
Wonderful, thank you.
And quickly, just a reminder to everyone, you could please mute yourself and make sure you're muted until it's appropriate for you to talk. If you're a board member, obviously you can mute yourself whenever you need to. If you're a guest, if you could please wait for a prompt to unmute yourself, that would be great. Thank you. Also, if you're having difficulties with, could you please make sure that if you are listening to the meeting that you are using headphones or that your volume is sufficiently lowered so that it prevents feedback. And could you also, it's not necessary to have video. So if you don't absolutely need your video, you can disable it. Yeah, it helps reduce some of the lag in the system, and we're recording the meeting, so it keeps the file size smaller if the video is off. Again, a reminder, if you could please make sure that you're muted and please make sure that your volume is low or that you have headphones on.
Yeah, everyone should be muted. Turn your video link off. Computer audio and a telephone audio on at the same time. Okay, that might want to mute.
Hey, Wynn, can you make sure to mute yourself on both devices? Thank you.
You can turn your video off as well. Carol as well can turn their video links off.
We're waiting for just one more board member, and then we'll have a quorum. So everyone,
Thank you.
thank you.
This is Win. Win, have I done it right?
Your volume is really high. You can turn your volume down somewhat, and you should turn your video link off.
That's stop video, right?
Correct.
Okay.
You should still be able to see the screen that's being shared, so that shouldn't be a problem. There you go. You got it. Wint, you're also signed in twice, and that might be the source of the feedback.
How do I fix that?
I think if you, well, I don't want to lose you, Wint, but if you leave the meeting for one of these links, the other one should stay connected. If there's a tech support listening to this, help us out here.
Yeah, if Wint is joined twice, I can just mute one of the Wints, and then that should be fine as long as we can hear him on the other one. So Wint, you're muted on one of these. Can you try to speak?
Come in, Wint.
Is there anything for me to do?
Nope. No, you're all set.
Thank you.
But you could slightly turn down your volume.
I will.
Thank you.
Doug,
Yes.
we have sufficient members of the board logged into the call, so I think it's time to start the meeting, and then we'll do a roll call.
Excellent. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm calling the meeting to order at 10:08 a.m. Welcome, everyone, to the 181st meeting of the New York State Board for Historic Preservation. It is December 3rd. This is a webinar meeting because of the suspension of the open meetings law in New York State due to the COVID-19 crisis. We're very thankful to have everyone's participation and to have a quorum for this meeting. We will begin with the roll call.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to correct one thing. It's the 182nd meeting of the State Review Board.
Well, I can only...
I know that you haven't been involved in all 182, so it's easy to lose count.
Okay.
So when I call on each member, please note if you're present, and for those visitors and guests who are sitting in on today's WebEx, would you please briefly describe your either role on the board or what organization or entity you're representing? Starting with Doug Pirelli.
Thank you, Michael. I am currently serving as the chair of the State Review Board. I believe I'm in my second term, and I'm a former board member. I serve on the board as one of two archaeology representatives. I'm also the president of the New York Archaeological Council and a clinical assistant professor of archaeology in the anthropology department at the University of Buffalo.
Wint Aldridge.
This is Wint Aldridge. I'm still too loud. I'll fix that. Former Deputy Commissioner for Historic Preservation and a longtime member of the board or very involved in its meetings. Thank you.
Carol Clark.
I'm former Deputy Commissioner for Historic Preservation and an adjunct professor teaching historic preservation at Pratt Institute, Columbia University, and NYU.
J. D. Lorenzo. Kristen Herron.
Good morning. I'm Kristen Herron. I represent the New York State Council on the Arts, where I serve as Program Director for Architecture and Design and Museums.
Erica Krieger.
Yes, good morning. I'm Erica Krieger. I am an architect. I am an assistant manager over or manager for the variance unit at the Division of Building Standards and Codes, and I'm representing the Secretary of State here.
Jennifer Lemack.
Whoops. Good morning. I'm Jennifer Lemack. I'm the Chief Curator of History at the New York State Museum and serve as the Commissioner of Education's representative on the board.
Jane Goodman. Lucy Waletsky.
Oh, good morning. I'm Lucy Waletsky, and I'm the longtime chair of the New York State Council of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. Thank you.
Paul Stewart. Chuck Vandry. Mr. Chairman, Chuck Vandry indicated in an email to me earlier that he would be joining the meeting at about 10:50, but we have 7 members present, which constitutes a quorum.
Jay is here as well.
All right, I'll call on J. D. Lorenzo.
Here.
Excellent. And your role and what you represent?
Preservation League of State.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, we have 8 members present, which constitutes a quorum.
Excellent. All right. Do we want to move to approval of the September minutes or the introduction of guests?
Let's move to the approval of minutes. Let's do the introduction of guests with each nomination.
Understood. All right. Are there any questions or comments about the September minutes? And if there is not, do I hear a motion to approve?
This is Jay. I'll make a motion to approve.
We have a second.
This is Erica.
Kristen.
I'll second.
Any objections or abstentions? There being none, that is approved by unanimous consent. We now move to the next agenda item, which is the Deputy Commissioner's Report. Daniel McKay.
Good morning, folks. Daniel McKay. I currently serve as Deputy Commissioner for Historic Preservation and oversee the work of the Division for Historic Preservation for the Office of Parks. Nice to see you all convened here. This is our third virtual meeting of this board. It's likely we will have at least a fourth in March, and maybe something beyond that. But I just appreciate the efforts of staff and board members and the public to adapt to this format, and indeed our reach, particularly the ability for the public to interact with the board virtually is greater now than it has ever been before. Staff and a number of other folks convened here today are just coming off the conclusion yesterday of our 2020 statewide historic preservation conference, of course, presented virtually this year. It was slated to be hosted by advocates and preservation professionals in Syracuse last spring, obviously canceled that in-person gathering due to COVID. A number of parties worked hard and efficiently to reprogram to a virtual format, which occurred over the last 2 days. I think really my sense, having watched and participated in various components these last 2 days, and my sense of early feedback is that it was we really must consider it a strong success. We had over 430 registrants. The programming very much built upon the Rochester conference in the fall of 2019. And so what I very much appreciate is sort of the evolution or continuum that this year's conference presented, building on the 2019 content. We had several sessions, including plenaries, both mornings, focused on issues related to implicit bias in historic preservation, and convened speakers on both days who really held out some challenges for the preservation community in New York State to achieve even more success in terms of community engagement, documenting, preserving untold stories in New York State. And while I do think we are a leading state in that basic regard, we've made early efforts to tell untold stories and to use the National Register program to document a wider sweep of New York State's remarkably diverse history. There is obviously more work to be done. So on SHPO's staff, a call out to Dan McEnany, a call out to Fran Stern, a call out to Christina Vasvolgi, and great thanks for their ability to shift from in-person to online. It was a conference that really went off quite effectively without any apparent technical hitches, and really assembled a great audience online and really exposed New York State's preservation community to a very broad and experienced group of speakers, both in state and from out of state. So thank you for all that effort. The sessions will be available in an online format early in the new year, probably by January, and we will make those sessions available to the board. There are some sessions that I would love to have Chairman Pirelli prescribe as key watching for State Review Board members who were not able to participate or spend time with the conference while it was live. And we look forward to the extended life that this conference will have in that online format. Staff has been returning to work on a part-time basis physically to our office space on People's Island. We are running on a day-to-day basis about at 35% occupancy due to COVID concerns and restrictions, trying to keep a safe work environment in that regard. It has been nice to see people, at least in part, or episodically in person. I just continue to appreciate the flexibility and adaptability that the State Preservation Office staff has shown throughout this process. Our workload has been quite undiminished during this time. I'm heartened, when I reference that, I'm talking about the compliance program is really running equal to last year's submissions. The tax credit program is certainly keeping pace with last year. All of these, I think, are good early signs that New York State's economy, underneath the public health challenges, is keeping pace. It's the federal fiscal year for the tax credit program closed out at the end of September. That's the benchmark that the National Park Service uses for measuring the program. We did come back to our #1 national ranking in that program. We had slipped to #3 2 years ago. We are now back at #1. We had over $740 million worth of tax credit funded activity in the federal fiscal year that concluded in September. The pace of that program has certainly continued heavily this fall since September, and there are a few things to note. One is, for all the success that major urban areas, Albany, Syracuse, Buffalo, Rochester, have shown, we are now seeing the program reach into secondary regional cities. So Niagara Falls, for example, there's been an extraordinary amount of activity, particularly around Part 1s in Niagara Falls in the last 6 to 8 months, including a recent spate. I think 6 or 8 Part 1s came in for Niagara Falls just in the last 3 or 4 weeks. City of Utica is suddenly showing great use of the program. So wonderful to see another canal corridor community make use. And then even in rural areas, we have our first, based on work that the State Review Board did to list historic districts in Sullivan County. We now have, I think, 2 or 3 tax credit projects in Sullivan County. These are the first tax credit projects to ever occur there. So some continuing good signs for a highly successful program for our office and for New York State. I want to note that our office is in receipt of a $750,000 grant from the Paul Brune Fund at the National Park Service to implement, in conjunction with the Landmark Society of Western New York, a series of preservation initiatives in the Genesee Valley region. So we're going to be able to incentivize historic preservation, not only in a more rural part of New York State, which is great, a region that has been very creative with their Main Street programming and Main Street development, but these are also gateway communities to very important parks in our state park system, such as Letchworth. And of course, the Genesee Valley Trail is now a linear park in the state park system. So we're very pleased that our office, and let me note Fran Stern's work in particular, to develop and to write and develop this grant and submit it, first time grant writing. And she winds up with $750,000 for our work in the southern tier there, or central, the Finger Lakes region. So, yeah, we're doing good work. We're keeping pace. We're thankful that no one in our staff has been sick, and looking forward to this next round of nomination reviews so that we can continue to advance historic preservation, community development, economic development. I don't know if Jay, I don't think Wayne is with us, yes, but Jay, if you have comments, or Michael Lynch, if you have comments about the statewide preservation conference, this might be a good time to share them.
And Daniel, I'm here, by the way, it's Wayne.
Hooray.
But if Jay wants to go first, that'd be great, and then I can follow Jay.
Yeah, I mean, I concur with what Daniel said. I thought it was an excellent conference, and I thought, the idea of doing it virtually, while it was, while I think it's challenging for those of us that like to get together and talk to the attendees and meet new friends. We're kind of limited in that way. I think that it really does open it up to more participation and makes it easier for people to kind of move in and move out and see some sessions, take part in the event, but not have to travel and do those things which maybe they otherwise wouldn't do. And of course, it also allows you to bring in the expertise, as Daniel said. I think it gives you more flexibility there. We've certainly seen it in our special events and things at the league, where we're able to get speakers and authors and other people who maybe normally we wouldn't be able to secure for an in-person event, but we're able to get them virtually. So I think that's tremendously beneficial. And clearly the theme this year, the diversity and inclusion theme, and is so important. And I don't think that preservation is definitely not there, but I think that that we have a lot to add to that discussion, and I think we've done a lot of great work, particularly here in New York State, and to try to tell those stories that often aren't told. And it seems to me that we've got a good basis for that, and hopefully this conference will help us move that forward.
Wayne, would you like to add anything?
Sure, that'd be great. Yeah, first of all, thanks to our partners, Preservation League of New York State, Preservation Association of Central New York, and then Daniel, certainly the staff there at your office, Fran Stern, Dan McEnany, I know had a big role to play as well. This year we had about 480, just under 500 registrants. I think that's a record for us. So I think that is a testament to the content that was provided. This year, again, the theme of equity and inclusion, diversity, was building off of last year's, I think, successful conference. So far, we've had a great reviews, and we're listening to feedback, and we will for the next probably month or so, and we'll connect with our partners, and I think hopefully build off of this for next year. So thanks, everyone. I felt like it was a wonderful conference.
Thank you, Wayne. Does that conclude the Deputy Commissioner's report?
Yes, sir, it does.
All right, we'll move on to the Director's report, Michael Lynch.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to build on what Daniel, Jay, and Wayne have already said about the statewide preservation conference, and I'd also like to thank the staff who were presenters during the presentations. One of the things that struck me about this conference was that because it was virtual, in addition to a very large registration, 16 states and 1 Canadian province were represented by the attendees and participants. And we had speakers from far and near, speakers from Texas, Arizona, Georgia, Washington, D.C., and Pennsylvania, speakers that we would not normally be able to attract to an in-person conference. One of the comments that was received from one of the recipients during the Q&A session was the hope that in the future, even when we can return to an in-person conference, that some form of this online or virtual attendance would be a part of that, so that people who can't travel for any number of reasons might still be able to participate. So that is something for the planners to think about for the eventual return to normalcy. One of the other things that was a strength for our office in particular is that many of the presentations dealt very specifically with topics that we are addressing in the development of our statewide preservation plan that is due to the National Park Service in March. Diversity, high among them, but also disaster preparedness, resilience, and recovery. Reaching out to tell the stories of the underrepresented. There were many topics, and I know that the staff have taken many notes on things that we can include in our state historic preservation plan to try and accomplish over the next 5 years. And that's a segue to the state historic preservation plan. Originally, the due date was the end of December, but because of COVID, the National Park Service has extended that to the end of February. Our staff are in the midst right now of developing the goals and objectives for multiple topics that will be addressed in that plan. And a draft of that will be circulated to the board in January for comment before it goes public. One last thing, usually for the December State Review Board meeting, we also schedule the announcement of our State Preservation Awards. Because we're not doing the meeting, nor are we doing the awards in person this year, the awards schedule is slightly different. The preservation awardees will be notified just before Christmas, the week of December 22nd, of their receipt of a preservation award, and they will be announced by the governor's office right after Christmas, just before the new year. At that point, there will then be a gallery available on the agency website for all to see who the preservation awardees were for 2020. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the director's report.
Thank you, Michael. We now move on to the National Register review session of our meeting today. And I believe Jennifer Walkowski will start the first.
Well, Kathy's going to introduce it.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. This is Kathy Howe. I'm head of the Survey and National Register Unit here. I first wanted to just welcome all of the guests that we can see, and we'll get to you in a second as we're giving the presentations. But welcome to all of our guests from across the state who are joining us today. We're so happy that you could be here virtually. I'm showing you now the statewide map that gives the locations of the properties that are being considered at today's meeting. I also want to thank a few other people as well. First, to the staff who've worked diligently with our nomination sponsors, owners, and consultants to pull together today's roster. Now, we all know that doing research during a pandemic can be very challenging, as not everything is available online. I also want to give a big thank you to Bill Krattinger, our Parks Survey Coordinator, and Dan McEnany, Coordinator of our Community Preservation Services Bureau, who are helping out over the next few State Review Board quarters as mentors to our 6 National Register in Training staff members. And last, but certainly not least, I want to give a big thank you to Kath LaFranc, Parks historian, who is also serving as a mentor to NR staff, as she is actually now jumping in and heading up all of the reviews for the applications that come to us as part of the commercial tax credit program, all of the preliminary determinations for individual listing, the Part 1 applications. Many of these applications are very complicated, and so we're so fortunate that Kath can, as Wint would say, Kath, the doyenne of National Register. We're so happy that Kath is playing a mentor role as well as part of that program, which then feeds into our National Register program. So with that, I will turn it over to our first presentee, Jen Walkowski, starting with Niagara Falls. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kathy. Good morning, everybody. We'll get started. The Main Street Historic District is significant as one of the most intact commercial corridors in the city of Niagara Falls, New York, retaining a collection of resources that spans the era during which the city of Niagara Falls was at the height of its prominence and success during the mid-19th and well into the 20th century. The Main Street Historic District is significant under National Register Criterion A in the area of commerce and community development and planning for its association with the growth and expansion of the north end of the city of Niagara Falls during its years of economic success, subsequent decline, and efforts at rejuvenation. The district is also significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture for its collection of 19th and 20th century architecture, which ranges from modest stone-constructed commercial buildings to high-style architect-designed public buildings. The district encompasses 66 properties, primarily commercial and public buildings, stretched along and adjacent to the historic commercial Main Street corridor. The period of significance extends from 1855 to 1974 and encompasses the development of the district over several different eras: early urbanization, the advent of the car culture, the decline of commerce and industry, termination of railroad services, and modernization and community development initiatives. Next slide, please. The route of Main Street followed one of the earliest paths through the Niagara frontier, a portage route between Lewiston and Fort Schlosser used to bypass Niagara Falls. However, the nominated district developed following this establishment of river crossings to Canada starting in the 1840s. The completion of John Augustus Roebling's Suspension Bridge in 1855 marked the beginning of a period of intense urbanization and commercialization in the district that endured for several decades. The subsequent settlement was initially known as Bellevue, but eventually took the name Suspension Bridge after its most prominent feature. Next slide. Suspension Bridge and the city of Niagara Falls initially developed as separate entities with distinct business districts, and the two settlements sat on either side of Clarksville, a much less developed hamlet between Pierce Avenue and Cedar Avenue. When Suspension Bridge was absorbed into the city in 1892, the newly incorporated city of Niagara Falls had two main streets serving different communities. While mid-20th century urban renewal initiatives left little historic fabric intact in downtown Niagara Falls, the commercial area on Main Street to the north survived and remains largely intact. Next slide. The nominated district contains 66 total resources, with 50 of them determined to be contributing. It is largely a commercial strip along Main Street and adjacent side streets, with some supporting buildings such as churches, a school, and a library. Next slide. Resources span over a century of architectural development in the area, encompassing a broad range of architectural styles and construction methods, ranging from stone-built commercial blocks to commercial Italianate buildings to early 20th century styles. Resources dating to the early decades of the 20th century are the most common, the result of an economic boom in the city during the 1910s and 20s. These commercial buildings reflected a wide range of retailers, from local shops and businesses to larger national chain stores. Next slide. There are two churches in the district. First Congregational United Church of Christ, built in 1855, one of the oldest churches in the city of Niagara Falls, is located near the northwest corner of Main Street and Cleveland Avenue. It's shown in the lower right in the slide. The Church of the Epiphany and the Sunday School is located on the northeast corner of Main Street and Lockport Street. Next slide. The district is sort of bookended by two major projects from the 1970s. The growth of car culture after World War II and other factors ultimately contributed to the decline of the district as new commercial ventures located themselves in the growing suburbs. Additionally, the decline of industry in the 1950s and 60s affected the residential base as people moved away and the population declined. Around the same time, consolidations and changes in the railroad industry negatively impacted the district when train service to the area ceased in 1961, removing another source of employment for the district's residents. An attempt was made to revitalize the district in the early 1970s when the city supported three immense community development and modernization projects. At the north end of the nominated district is the Niagara Falls Housing Authority funded Whitewater Roebling Towers senior housing complex, completed in 1974. It's shown here. Next slide. At the south end of the district is the city-funded, architect-designed Earl W. Bridges Library and the neighboring state-funded, architect-designed Harry F. Abatee Elementary School, both also completed in 1974. The innovative Brutalist Library was designed by internationally significant architect Paul Rudolph, who created a sculptural monumental landmark within the historic district. Next slide. So the Main Street Historic District was sponsored by the Niagara Falls Historic Preservation Society. We have received no letters of objection for this district. Most of the buildings in this district have sat vacant for decades, suffering from neglect and deterioration. However, currently this section of the city is in the beginning stages of a renaissance. Our office has currently received 7 Part 1 applications for buildings within this district, with several more in the works. Now, I'm not sure if he's on the call, but we might have John Cake on the call. John, are you on the call?
Yes, I am here. Jennifer, thank you for running through that. Wish I'd had an audio to record that because I could use it, but thank you very much.
Certainly.
I am the president of Blue Cardinal Studio. The Blue Cardinal companies are a commercial real estate development endeavor focused on impact development projects. We have a great interest in the Niagara Falls community because of its unique location on a border with Canada, because of the international brand of Niagara Falls itself, And because of recent development activity in the city and development pressure coming both from the Buffalo area as well as from Toronto as well. In June of 2019, we purchased a portfolio of 38 properties. Nearly all of them are within the historic district. And our focus and commitment is to the revitalization of the historic downtown shopping district. We have currently 10 buildings on Main Street in the shopping district planned for adaptive reuse. A number of them we have filed for Part 1s. Jennifer mentioned 7. We have 3 more that are planned to be submitted for the historic tax credit project. Those will be adapted on the first floors for retail or entertainment purposes, and the upper floors either office or apartment buildings, apartments rather. And the apartments will range from Class A market rate apartments to worker housing. We are expecting a significant job creation in the city through this effort, and with a preference both in the construction awards for Niagara County and Niagara City businesses and workers. And we are very excited about this project and very appreciative of the consideration of this district to be registered and to pursue the adaptive reuse of as many of these buildings as we can manage. Thank you to the board for the time.
Thank you. What a wonderful project and opportunity for the city of Niagara Falls.
Thank you so much, John.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Any other questions or comments about the Main Street Historic Niagara Falls from the board, or anyone else any other?
This is Wint. I just thank you for the delight of seeing that Roebling Bridge in that early photograph. Marvelous.
Absolutely.
A very good project too.
And I also thank you for not showing the DiCamillo Bakery photo, so I don't have the Pavlovian response that I had when I read the nomination. Yeah, wonderful nomination. A great way to kick off the morning today. Any other questions or comments? Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved, Carol Clark.
Second?
Seconded, Kristen.
Any objections or abstentions? There being none, this is approved by unanimous consent.
Mr. Chairman, it wasn't clear who made that motion.
It was Carol and Kristen, I believe.
That's correct.
First and second.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
Wonderful.
All right,
Thank you very much.
Nomination, Jennifer Betzworth in the Nassau County Courthouse, I believe.
Yes, good morning. So we'll get started. The Nassau County Courthouse, constructed 1938 to 1940, is locally significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as an excellent example of a modern classic civic complex. Next. The courthouse was the first component of an overall civic center plan on a new site, the Mineola Fairgrounds. Lawrence J. Lincoln, the architect for the courthouse, drew on City Beautiful movement ideas to create a formal civic landscape with a strong axis, green spaces, and 4 small parking lots. Lincoln, who had worked for Henry Bacon's firm on the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., appears to have drawn from his experience with the National Mall in his design. And in this image, you see the courthouse on the far left. Next. The courthouse complex, situated at the head of the new Civic Center, included a central courthouse and 2 flanker buildings within a designed landscape. The buildings feature simplified classical elements, a prominent plinth, and a flat roofline typical of the modern classic style. Next. Following World War I, modern classicism emerged as a reflection of the interwar period. The style, which became popular during the 1920s and 1930s, emerged as a transitional blend between the Beaux-Arts style and simpler modern styles. Next. Modern classicism was used in many of the buildings of the Federal Triangle in Washington, D.C., and was so frequently used across the country during the 1930s that it helped establish a national architectural image that retained ties to traditional architectural forms while offering a forward-looking vision for civic architecture. These are the two flanker buildings that sit alongside the courthouse. The complex really is so large that it's hard to photograph. Next. The courthouse also features bas-reliefs by Albert Stewart, a prolific works progress administration era sculptor. Stewart's work at the courthouse reflects his turn toward contemporary figures and subject matter, often directly referencing the building's function. Next. And here's a few more details from the outside. The bronze lanterns at the courthouse steps are an exact copy on a smaller scale of the stone lanterns at the Lincoln Memorial. Next. The attention to detail extended to the building's interior, which featured a rich use of materials, including limestone, Tennessee marble, granite terrazzo, and bronze work. The courthouse's central atrium, a public space designed to impress, next, features a colonnade of polished concrete columns, a second-story balcony, and skylights. And it really is just a beautiful space. Next, the courtrooms, which extend from the central atrium, feature oversized limestone door surrounds. Each courtroom has an open two-story volume and retains historic period details. Next. Some of those details are these wonderful light fixtures throughout by Edward Caldwell and Company, one of the top designers and manufacturers of light fixtures during the period. And of course, I just had to share this excellent mailbox. Next. And that is the Nassau County Courthouse. This was a Columbia student draft by Micah Titchener, and we have letters of support from Kathleen Rice of the U.S. House of Representatives, Madeline Singas, Nassau County District Attorney, Daniel Looney, the Deputy Executive Assistant District Attorney, Sarah Kautz from Preservation Long Island, and William Gary and Brian A. Pinola from the Garden City Historical Society. And I do have a guest here today, Daniel Looney, who's been the project's sponsor. Daniel, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you very much to Deputy Commissioner McKay and the board for the fantastic work that you have done and made New York State a leader in the area of historic preservation. I personally have had a very good relationship with the state going back to 1990. By profession, I'm a prosecutor for about 40 years now. I had the great fortune of working for 4 excellent district attorneys and have worked for them in classically designed courthouses, the first being the Bronx County Courthouse, located on the Grand Concourse in Bronx County, and currently for over 30 years in the Nassau County Courthouse. I think the work that you do is a great testament to the importance of historic preservation in New York State. I want to give special thanks to Jennifer Betzworth, because but for Jennifer Betzworth, I wouldn't be here speaking to you now. She's a public servant in the true sense of the word. She was always available when I needed to talk to her about aspects of the courthouse, and she shepherded us through this entire process. I'd also like to thank the members of this team effort. It's an effort of the state. It's an effort of college, particularly at Columbia University, that made this possible. And special thanks to Columbia University School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, Professor Andrew Dahlkirk, who was head of the master's program in preservation, and as Jennifer said, Mika Teichner, who was the student who actually drafted this application. I'm very grateful to all those parties for this. As I said, by profession, I'm a prosecutor for about 40 years. Many of my years were spent in homicide prosecution, and I found a similarity between investigation in terms of the legal aspect and investigating historic structures such as the courthouse. The challenge with the courthouse, it was a project without evidence, so to speak, in view of the fact that our courthouse records had burned up at Mitchell Field in 1974. And unfortunately, the WPA records were thrown out in 1943. So the investigation that had to be done here to find out the nature of this building was it's quite the effort, and I commend all parties for their efforts in digging into that, making that investigation. Again, I have my application is historic preservation. I've worked on the Farmingdale Railroad Station, which was made a landmark in 1991 on the National Register. I noticed there's a number of churches that have applied and are part of the National Register process. Again, I worked on the St. Killian's Church in Farmingdale, and now I'm working with Jennifer and Mr. Teichner on this application. I feel very strongly about this application. I think that civic architecture plays such an important role in society, and the work that you do is so important for society, preserving these works of civic art. This whole process has been a tremendous learning experience for me. It's brought me to the city of Buffalo, where I learned that Albert Stewart did the artwork in Buffalo on the city hall. It brought me to Ithaca, where I learned that the fans were actually built by General Electric. It brought me to Queens and Manhattan. It just shows the great interconnection, all the effort that was made in making this building come to fruition. It also is a great learning experience in terms of seeing it's basically a visual timeline. I see elements from looking at this courthouse of Greece and Rome. And it also brings us back to the founding of our nation with Thomas Jefferson, where he not only brought the key principles of government to this new nation, but his designs in architecture played such a pivotal role in making a statement of where we stood as a nation. And you see it evidenced throughout the National Mall in terms of the Capitol, the Supreme Court, and the other buildings that you see throughout Washington. It's this classic architecture that makes such a statement about who we are. And I think civic architecture is particularly important in terms of a courthouse, in terms of the message it conveys. And the DA in her letter of support made a statement into the importance of that aspect, and the importance of the statement that we make, because these buildings, these courthouses, speak of the importance of the work that we do within the walls of this building. The building is important, number one, because of its architectural style and where it comes in the architectural timeline from the classical to the neoclassical. We have an 1899 courthouse in Nassau County to the modern classic design of this courthouse. It's also unique, and it's the only courthouse I'm aware of that's designed based on the Lincoln Memorial. And if any of you, and I welcome anyone who comes to Nassau County, I would love to give you all a tour of the courthouse because it's really a fascinating complex. And the cases that have been tried here have had impact, not just locally, but there's some cases that have national impact. It's been the focus of so much activity in our community. And one of the final points why I think this application and why the work that you do in making these locations National Register nominations and to dedicate them as landmarks is that it really fulfills our obligation as stewards. I think we have an obligation, and this was noted in the letter of support by the DA. We have an obligations of stewardship. People think of historic preservation as things in the past, the general public, but I think everyone on this board that historic preservation deals with the past, the present, and it's for the future. We have an obligation as stewards to make sure these great edifices are preserved for future generations and the messages that they bring. And it's our obligations as stewards to bring them into the future. One final point I'd like to make in terms of the relevance of the Nassau County Courthouse. This courthouse in 1940 was the sole courthouse for all of Nassau County: civil court, family court, juvenile court, surrogates court. With the passage of time, the growth of the community, that was set into different courts throughout this complex here. But as a result of COVID and the challenges of COVID, all of those functions came back to their home in the Nassau County Courthouse, because as a result of COVID, this building was uniquely designed to handle the spacing requirements with its large, as you saw, the rotunda, its large courtrooms. And this building was the center, once again, in 2020, was the center of all courts in Nassau County and led us through a critical part of the pandemic and continues to do so. And it leads us into the future. So I just would like to end. I'm sorry I spoke longer than anticipated. Just as a side note, I would like to commend Janet Wilkowski on her presentation. I graduated from Niagara University. I appreciate all the work that you're putting into that area. It's a great area, and that was a very excellent presentation. But I'd just like to end with the last lines of the DA's letter to the board, that she says she welcomes the recognition of this nomination will bring to a significant national landmark. I also welcome the opportunity in these most challenging times to take advantage of a variety of grants that can enable us to care for this gift from an earlier generation. It will assist our generation in fulfilling our obligations as stewards to ensure that the courthouse will continue to serve the ends of justice, remain a symbol of our values that we cherish, and be a source of tremendous community pride for future generations. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Wonderful statement. Any other questions or comments about the Nassau County Courthouse?
This is Kristen, if I may.
Please, please.
First of all, thank you for the presentation and the additional comments. I really appreciate that, particularly since I am physically located in Nassau County right now. But I did have a question for you, Jennifer. In reading the nomination, the grounds are listed as one of the contributing resources. And my understanding from the way I read it is that there have been significant changes to the grounds, which are sort of understandable. But I was wondering if you could just briefly speak about, do they definitely retain sufficient integrity to be considered a contributing resource?
Happy to comment on that.
Thank you.
So there's the grounds directly around the courthouse and the flanker buildings, which we are including. You know, they retain the landscaping, the paths, they really retain their original plan. And then there's the grounds away from the building that you sort of saw in that original civic center plan, and those have been modified and those aren't being kept. They're not included in the nomination boundary. Because of those changes that happened over time. So I'll take another look at the nomination and make sure that that is clear, because that is an important point. So thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it.
Any other?
I'm happy to nominate it if everyone is ready.
All right, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Wayne will second.
Any objections or abstentions? There being none, it is approved by unanimous consent. And we will move on to Eagle's Nest.
All right, thank you all. So staying on Long Island, we're going to move to Eagle's Nest, which is the William K. Vanderbilt II estate. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1985. So what you're seeing today is an additional documentation and boundary increase that adds land historically associated with the estate, updates information on its resources, and expands the period of significance and area of significance for the nomination. Next. The original nomination included all of the estate north of Little Neck Road. The former superintendent's residence, which wasn't in county ownership in 1985, was left out. With this amendment, the entire historic landscape associated with the estate is now included in the nomination boundary. Next. The original nomination briefly described the major buildings on the estate, and the updated document includes more robust descriptions and a photo of each resource. Next. The document also includes descriptions of historic resources which were not described or counted in the original nomination. These tended to be smaller scale or related to the property's historic landscape, like the swimming pool and the peacock pool here. All, very important to note. Next. The updated nomination also includes a robust exterior and interior description of Eagle's Nest itself, which is a remarkable building. Next. Initially, Vanderbilt commissioned architects Warren and Wetmore to design estate buildings in medieval French and English architectural styles. The superintendent's residence, built circa 1917, is reflective of this early period of the estate's development. Next. The building features pink granite walls on the first story, half timbering, a steep slate roof, and copper gutters and finials. The landscape and a handful of small support buildings around it also remain. Next. While the original nomination focused exclusively on the property's architectural significance, the additional documentation expands upon its significance in the area of education. William K. Vanderbilt II was an avid traveler and took a scientific approach to collecting zoological and ethnographic artifacts. To house his collection, Vanderbilt constructed this building, the Hall of Fishes, as a public museum on the edge of the property. Next. Vanderbilt hired William Belansky, an architect from the New York Museum of Natural History, as the full-time curator of the museum. Belansky lived on site and worked directly with Vanderbilt, who was determined to create the finest private marine museum in the world. Everything from the color of the glass to the size of the lettering was designed to Vanderbilt's specifications. During the late 1920s, Vanderbilt also began establishing museum rooms and wings in the mansion itself, with the intention that it would become part of a larger public park and museum after his death. Next. In 1950, the estate officially reopened as the Suffolk County Vanderbilt Museum. Thanks to the hard work of the museum's staff, this amended nomination now better reflects the history of the property. The draft was by Killian Taylor, a curatorial assistant at the Suffolk County Vanderbilt Museum, and she is a guest today here at the call. Killian, would you like to speak on behalf of the nomination?
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Killian Taylor. I am a curatorial associate at the Suffolk County Vanderbilt Museum, and as Jennifer mentioned, the primary preparer of the nomination. So to build on what was mentioned, so as our original nomination was created in 1985, it was very much limited to the primary property, and unfortunately at that time, Normandy Manor, as we refer to it, had been sold off prior to this. So after we had reacquired it, we wanted to ensure that this property, which was very much an essential part of the property, it's actually one of the oldest buildings, in fact, remained part of it. As you can see from the pictures there, this property was not only served as the year-round superintendent's cottage, which I say very loosely, it's a rather large building. It allowed the property to be maintained year-round while Mr. Vanderbilt was traveling around the world or through one of his other properties. It also contained extensive gardens that allowed the property to function with near self-sufficiency, particularly in the early 20th century when traveling on Long Island was a bit more limited than it is today. Apart from that, as was also mentioned in our original nomination, the nature of the museum was rather overlooked, and this is something we wanted to reflect better in our updated version. As Jennifer mentioned, when Mr. Vanderbilt purchased his property here, originally it was a place of recreation, but by 1924, his extensive travels had resulted in a large collection of marine specimens, and he opted to build a museum here on the property to house them, which is why he led to the acquisition of William Belansky. He was to clarify, he was actually an artist with the Museum of Natural History before Mr. Vanderbilt employed him. Now, the museum was something Vanderbilt took very seriously during his time here. Belansky was hired as the full-time curator. He actually had his own house built on the property itself to ensure that the museum was built exclusively to Mr. Vanderbilt's specifications. During his worldwide expeditions, including his major ones in 1928 and 1932, Belansky, along with several other members of former employees of the Museum of Natural History, accompanied him on his expeditions to ensure that the specimens collected were not only collected in their most pristine conditions, but also cataloged and organized with the most up-to-date information available at the time. So, with our nomination, we want to ensure that this property really reflects the wonderful nature of Eagle's Nest, not only as a Gold Coast era estate, but also as one of Long Island's probably earliest natural history museums, in fact. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions and comments about the Eagle's Nest nomination?
Mr. Chairman, this is Michael Lynch. I'd like to ask for clarification on the architects. The nomination says Reed and Stem, but the presentation was for Warren and Wetmore, the other architects for Grand Central Terminal. Could Jennifer clarify that, please?
My recollection from the nomination is Warren and Wetmore. I'll have to take a look.
Other comments and questions about Eagle's Nest?
Great job.
Do I hear a motion?
This is Wint. I'll move the approval.
And this is Lucy. I'll second it.
All right, Wint moved, Lucy Lowetsky second. Any abstentions or oppositions? There being none, we approve this by unanimous consent. I would also like to observe that I believe Chuck Vandry is also part of the quorum now.
Thank you all.
All right, we're going to move on to the Brockport West Side Historic District and Virginia Bartos.
Good morning. My presentation is the Brockport West Side Historic District in Monroe County. The Village of Brockport is a certified local government, and this nomination, prepared by Barrow Architecture from Rochester, was funded by a CLD matching grant. The district is comprised of resources along Main Street, south of a previously listed commercial district, and neighboring streets on the west side. The west side streets largely reflect the village's mid to late 19th century growth and nominated district's relationship to SUNY Brockport. For these reasons, the district is being nominated under criterion A in the areas of social history and community planning and development. Next slide, please. Thank you. The district contains 4 previously listed properties, including St. Luke's Episcopal Church, seen in the upper image, and the Morgan Manor House and Care lower image, headquarters of the local historical society. The period of significance spans from 1821 to 1965 and includes some commercial properties near the north end of the district. Next slide, please. Largely residences. As stated in the nomination, the district contains 232 primary buildings, along with 83 contributing secondary buildings that are mostly garages associated with primary buildings. Only 80 primary non-contributing buildings are within the district, attesting to its integrity. Next slide, please. Mentioned that the district is also being nominated under criterion C for its wide array of architectural styles that include high style and more modest versions of Greek Revival, Italianate, Queen Anne, Colonial Revival, and Craftsman designs. It also contains examples of 20th century minimal traditional, Cape Cod, and split level designs. Next slide, please. 2 structures, that is 2 railroad bridges, are part of the district. Streets near the rail line, such as Park Street, include buildings that have a direct link to the railroad. The brick house seen here at 205 Park was originally built as a railroad hotel and is now being renovated as a bed and breakfast using federal commercial tax credits. The building Part 1 approval. Next slide, please. By the 1850s, portion settled, but as more people migrated to the lands in that area, the village annexed 284 acres for additional streets. Lots in this section were smaller and several houses were built by developers. School built in 1915. Barely visible in the background is the 1856 church. The school closed in 2003 and the building is now the Corpus Christian Academy. Next slide. This historic districts are listed on the national register. West Side District illustrates the growth of the village through its districts have from see the War II stay oratory before Newman's West diverse only from arrest and observation him on.
Yeah, questions or comments about the Brockport West Side Historic District? Virginia, your voice is breaking up a little bit and it's coming in a little bit choppy, so I just want to
I'm sorry.
give
Okay.
people a chance to respond if there's any questions or comments about the Brockport West Side HG.
Mr. Chair, this is Wayne Goodman. I just wanted to say I thought that this nomination was extremely extensive, very thorough and well written. This district in Brockport is really going to enhance, I think, the continuity of the entire central part of Brockport. It really meshes well with already existing districts, and I think all around good work.
Thank you, Wayne. That's great. Any other comments or a motion to approve?
This is Wayne. I'd make that motion.
Second?
This is Erica. I'll second.
Seconded by Erica Krieger. Any objections or abstentions? There being none, this nomination form is approved by unanimous consent. Thank you. Moving on to St. Stephen's Chapel, Otsego County, and Aaron Zernecki.
Chapel, supported by the Episcopal Diocese of Albany.
Hey, Aaron?
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. You were muted. Could you start over?
Okay.
I apologize. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I will start over. St. Stephen's Chapel in the hamlet of Maple Grove, town of Morris, Otsego County, is significant under Criterion A for settlement and social history, and Criterion C in the area of architecture. The building is a highly intact example of a small rural church built as a mission chapel supported by the Episcopal Diocese of Albany. During the 1860s and 1870s, the diocese worked to expand and support the church in rural areas of New York. At the crossroads hamlet of Maple Grove, a congregation was established by the 1850s and used a chapel provided by the Washburn family, who were longtime and influential members of the community. St. Stephen's Chapel was built with aid from the diocese and under the supervision of Reverend Daniel Washburn in 1889 and replaced an older building. Next slide. The new chapel was built by local craftsmen and is a neatly constructed Victorian high Gothic style wood frame building that expresses both medieval Gothic inspiration and the eclectic tastes of the late 1800s. The chapel exhibits the traditional long, narrow nave and steep gabled roof popular for high Victorian Gothic churches. The Episcopal Church was especially fond of this style for new church construction and remodels. The Bishop of Albany consecrated St. Stephen's in 1896, and it was used as the chapel for about 60 years, sharing a minister with Christ Church in nearby Gilbertsville. The diocese decommissioned St. Stephen's in 1961 when the congregation could no longer support the chapel. 4 years later, new owners converted the building with only minor alterations to a summer residence. Slide. The chapel interior has changed surprisingly little since it was first turned into a summer residence in the 1960s. The present owners have taken care to make changes for livability without compromising the fabric of the chapel. The kitchen cupboards in the sanctuary are installed to avoid damage to the walls. The tile fireback surrounding the wood stove placed in the northeast corner of the nave is similarly installed. The jacuzzi is turned into a bathroom with a tile shower stall and plumbing fixtures that could also be removed with little or no damage. This is St. Stephen's Chapel. Any questions?
Questions from the board for St. Stephen's Chapel?
Aaron, this is Daniel. I'm wondering if you can tell us the motivation for this nomination.
This nomination is purely honorary. The current owners are very proud of this chapel in their small community and would just like to have the honorary status National Register.
Other questions or comments? Motion to approve.
This is Jay. I'll move it.
And a second.
This is Jennifer Lemack. I'll second.
Any objections or abstentions? With none, it's approved by unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone. We now move to the Library Bureau Remington Rand Sperry Univac Manufacturing Complex.
This has a very long name. We decided to keep all of them in because all of those companies are very into the history of the site. Library Bureau Univac Manufacturing Complex, Ilion, Herkimer County, is under criterion A in the area of industry associated with the section of and interrelated industries in Ilion, and criterion C in the area of architecture. Industries represent more than 60 years of continuous industrial development and progressive product development in this small Mohawk Valley village from 1900 to 1971. These active and ever-evolving businesses had a global impact, first in the production of fine wood and metal library, school, and office furniture, next in revolutionary use and promotion of the card catalog and filing cabinet as a physical storage management system, and finally in rapid data processing and the newly evolving computer industry. Next slide. The complex includes features representing each of the most important phases of industrial development and consists of 4 components: a 1906 boiler house, a 1916 woodworking shop, 1 large interconnected series of buildings including 1906 office building, 2 1919 factories, and 1 1941 office factory, and 1 freestanding 1941 factory wing. 2 major components have been lost. However, the surviving components retain enough integrity to document the history of these important companies, as well as to illustrate the history and development of the site. Next slide. Buildings were constructed in 1906 for the manufacture of office furniture and filing cabinets by the Clark and Baker Woodworking Complex of the Library Bureau. The office building and the boiler house with attached brick chimney stack represent that era. However, the first manufacturing building and various smaller features such as kilns and open-air lumber yards have been lost. The actual railroad tracks have been removed, but their path is clearly evident. Next. Built in 1916, while L-shaped factory buildings were as the complex expanded to the east. Their large manufacturing was built in 1910 for metal products was consistently enlarged to the north, south, and east, extending the manufacturing complex to its eastern eastern boundary. Unfortunately, 7, one of the large manufacturing buildings in the late 20th century. Although it's 1941 south wing manufacture products for the Navy during World War II as an next slide. Oh, sorry. This slide. The complex became an ambitious business plan to create one company able to produce every single need in the administration business, office time-saving devices like the typewriter and tabulating machines to loose leaf paper and file folders. And then this slide, the last building to be built on the property in connection with manufacturing was Building 4, built in 1941. This building was originally built for producing the advanced tabulating machines that were considered essential in every business office, both commercial and governmental. However, with the introduction of the computer, Building 4 was used to produce the UNIVAC system, while the ground floor served as a training center for computer technicians. This manufacturing site remained a major employer of the residents of Ilion and Herkimer County until its gradual closing from 1967 to 1971. For much of that time, this plant and the business played part of mechanical office technology, from the typewriter to the introduction of electronic, computerized office technology that formed the basis of the modern data processing industry. Next slide. Complex is also significant as a representative, intact example of a factory building complex, illustrating the evolution of factory building construction and technology between 1906 and 1941. While the earliest buildings are constructed with brick and heavy timber wood frame, the two 1919 sections represent typical slow-burning mill construction of the period, which is characterized by heavy timber framing, brick firewalls, with tin-clad doors at their openings, steel staircases, and automatic sprinkler systems throughout. In contrast, Building 4, built in 1941, among the most recent additions, and not on this photo of prior to 1941, among the most recent additions, combines a steel structure system with structural clay tile walls, plastered or poured concrete ceilings, and large bands of multi-light steel-framed windows, providing a more streamlined appearance and substantially more light and air than the other buildings. The nomination was written by Kim Alvarez and sponsored by the Village of Ilion. We have an approved Part 1 for this property, and this is considered a very important project for the Village of Ilion, which is currently looking for developers for the site. This is the Library Bureau, Remington Rand, Sperry UNIVAC Manufacturing Complex. Any questions?
Thank you, Aaron. Dan McKay, would you like to start off the question session?
This is Wint. It amazes me that in one comparatively small village, there were two great industries, Remington Typewriter and Remington Arms. The gun maker, of course, continues there. Is there any historical connection between the two?
Yes. Yes, the Remington Typewriter Company was housed in a different complex than this site, but was connected when Rand purchased, was getting a business started at this site for office processing systems and furniture. He was a stakeholder also in the Remington Typewriter Company. So he was trying to bring all of those, everything to do with office furniture, office processing, tabulating, typewriting, all of those companies he was trying to bring together.
Thank you, but my question had to do with the maker of rifles and arms in Ilion, the Remington business there.
Oh,
Whether
yes,
there's a
those are
connection
connected.
between the typewriters and the gun maker.
Yeah, same family, two different, businesses. One is constructing typewriters, and the other one is making firearms. So that was the same family.
Thank you.
This is Daniel. I just want to share with the board sort of the genesis story for this nomination. I was invited to make a presentation at an Environmental Protection Agency Brownfields forum in Albany. And the focus of virtually the entirety of that meeting, other than my presentation, was really about brownfields cleanup and site clearances needed to achieve that. And I made the pitch that that we should really be trying to market former industrial sites like this as rehab ready, and that the most proactive stance that local economic development authorities could undertake would be to engage with SHPO to come do site visits, assess for National Register eligibility, and if there was enough intact at such complexes as this to perhaps earn a National Register nomination and thereby qualify for the federal and state tax credit programs, that was going to bring. That was a very critical piece of marketing these sites, is basically positioning them as rehab ready sites. And so I'm so pleased that John Pyzik from the Herkimer County Industrial Development Agency picked up on that offer. We had a site visit. That presentation is probably 18 months in the past. We had a site visit on a very cold day in January 2020. And subsequently, they hired Kim Alvarez as a consultant to prepare the nomination. Staff certainly paid a great deal of time and attention to this nomination. It is a complex site, complex history. The loss of buildings on site certainly offers some restrictions on how to position this for National Register consideration and eventual tax credit status. But I'm very pleased with sort of the evolution from a meeting that was about brownfields redevelopment that was really largely arguing for site clearance and demolition as a typical pathway to municipalities marketing their former industrial sites. In this one instance, we may be building towards a save and adaptive reuse. So just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Daniel. Other questions or comments about Remington Rand? Do I hear a motion?
This is Wint. I'll move approval.
And a second? I'm happy to.
It's Erica Krieger.
Erica Krieger, second. Any objections or abstentions? There being none, it passes by unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone. We can move
Thank
on.
you.
Yep. AME Zion Church, Kingston, and Chelsea Towers.
Hello, I'm hoping everyone can hear me. I've been having some tech issues this morning, but
Sounds good.
okay, good. So this is the AME Zion Church of Kingston and the historically associated Mount Zion Cemetery in Ulster County are historically significant under Criterion A in the areas of social history and ethnic heritage for their association with the oldest African American congregation in the city of Kingston and the role the church played as an anchor of Kingston's African American community. It is also significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as a good local example of an early 20th century neo-Gothic church. The period of significance for the nominated property, consisting of the church and the discontiguous cemetery, begins with the earliest documented grave in circa 1856 through the construction of the church in 1929 and ending with the last known burial in 1967. Next slide. Founded in 1848, the current church on Franklin Street was completed in 1929, replacing a previous frame church that was destroyed by fire. Designed by Kingston architect Thomas P. Rice, the modest brick church with central tower expressed the pride and aspirations of the congregation. The interior of the church has 2 floors, with the sanctuary on the first floor and the social hall and kitchen in the basement. The focal point of the sanctuary is the half-round raised altar with curved wood balustrade projecting from the center of the south wall. Next slide. The main entrance to the church opens into a vestibule on the first floor. The sanctuary features a 20-foot high coved ceiling with moldings, plaster walls, floor-to-ceiling round arched stained glass windows, and 5 pendulum lights. A central aisle is flanked by simple wood replacement pews. Next slide. The first church established by and for the people of color in Ulster County, AME Zion Church of Kingston served an important role as a social, cultural, and spiritual center of the community. It also provided opportunities for education and leadership and a refuge for discrimination. The church served a central role in Kingston's civil rights movement and functioned as a meeting place for such clubs as the Boy Scouts, the Elks Club, and later the Lawton Progressive Women's Club and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Next slide. The Mount Zion Cemetery, Kingston's second African-American cemetery, is located less than a mile south of the church in a hilly wooded section of Kingston off South Wall Street. Established in the mid-19th century, the cemetery provided documentation of the individuals and families who were part of Kingston's African-American community, many of whom had Dutch, French, Huguenot, and British surnames given by the families who had enslaved them. There are estimated to be over 100 markers in the cemetery, many of which belong to veterans of the Civil War and World Wars. The congregation remains active and continues to play an important role in Kingston's African American community. The AME Zion Church and the Mount Zion Cemetery remain of transcendent importance to the African American community of Kingston. We have letter support from the Mayor of Kingston, Congressman Antonio Delgado, and Kingston's Historic Landmarks Preservation Commission. Any questions?
Questions from the board? AME Zion Church and Cemetery.
Do we have a visitor that would like to speak about this church? Aisha Tyler?
Yes. Hi. This is Maisha. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Hi. Well, first, Chelsea did such a wonderful job with the presentation. We're absolutely proud, to have the nomination get to this point. Just speaking as both the interim secretary at AME Zion currently and for Reverend Bruce, the church is still of great importance to the community, and that is why we have preserved it as such. In addition to the church building itself, the cemetery is home to 26 veterans of foreign wars, particularly the 20th Colored Regiment, which was involved in the Civil War, and we also have several graves of Buffalo soldiers. So we, in conjunction with other local entities like the Veterans Association, care for the cemetery as a community asset, because it definitely is. In addition to the cemetery, the church building was home to NAACP meetings, and actually my grandmother, Bessie Smith Otis Tyler, helped to found the NAACP in 1952, that chapter, along with Hodge, Mr. Hodge. And so he, Everett Hodge, who was the first president, I believe, of the NAACP in Kingston. So, it's absolutely of great importance to us, and we're just very proud to advance the nomination has advances.
Thanks so much for that statement and for that added context. Other questions or comments? Well, I'd be happy to make a motion for approval of this one if somebody wants to second.
It's Carol Clark. I'll second it.
Any objections or abstentions? There being none, this nomination is approved by unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to New York Central and Hudson River Railroad Power Station.
Okay,
Please.
excellent. So this is the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad Power Station, which is a monumental Romanesque revival style building on the east bank of the Hudson River in Yonkers. Constructed between 1904 and 1906, with one addition in 1928, the power station extends out over the river on a system of pilings that support a concrete foundation. The power station consists of 3 contributing steel frame buildings, all faced primarily in red brick with terracotta detailing. The first and largest building is the 3-story power station, which contains the boiler room with its 2 brick smokestacks, coal tower, and turbine room. Then there is the 3-story switch house and substation, which is located north of the powerhouse. And then lastly is the small 1-story pump station, which is located just west of the powerhouse. Next slide. The building is significant under Criterion A in the area of transportation and under Criterion C in the area of engineering and architecture. The power station is significant not only for its critical role in providing efficient and safe electric rail service through Manhattan and a large suburban region north of New York City, but also as a major work of industrial architecture in the Romanesque revival style designed by the firm Reed and Stem. The period of significance begins in 1906 when the construction of the power station was completed and ends in 1936 when New York Central, seeking more affordable sources of power, began to purchase electricity from Consolidated Edison and sold the Yonkers Power Station to Yonkers Electric Light and Power Company. By 1963, the power station no longer functioned, and by the 1980s, it has essentially been abandoned. Next slide. After a train collision accident in 1902, the New York State Legislature passed a law banning all steam locomotives in Manhattan beginning in July 1908. Although the state law required New York Central to electrify its service only in Manhattan, the new plan extended electrified service well north of the city, making the heaviest commuting routes far more efficient. The new system would require new sources of electricity, the means to transmit it over a wide geographic area, and 30 new electric locomotives. Yonkers was chosen as an advantageous riverside location for 2 new power stations, and construction began in 1904, completed just 2 years later. Next slide. The power station in Yonkers functioned much like other large electrical generating stations of the day. The power station contained a boiler room and a turbine room. Coal would be delivered by rail to the trestle along the east side of the building or by boat to the coal tower along the west side. Unloaded by hoist, the coal traveled along conveyors at the top of the boiler room, where it would be crushed to the appropriate size before being dumped into the coal bunkers. The coal was then fed into mechanical stokers before it reached the boilers located at ground level. The boilers generated high-pressure steam from water pumped in from the river to power the 5,000 kilowatt turbo generators in the adjacent turbine room. Excess steam was then released through the stacks above the boiler room. Next slide. Although the interior has been stripped of most of the machinery originally used in the process to process the coal, the floor plans and use of the spaces are still readily identifiable today. Next slide. With its imposing scale, massing, and Romanesque revival treatment, the power station symbolizes the significant role the electricity was beginning to play in the lives of Americans, and in particular, the massive electrification effort undertaken by the New York Central Railroad beginning in 1903. This is a tax credit project with an approved Part 1 PDIL. We also have a letter of support from the Yonkers Landmarks Preservation Board. Any questions?
Mr. Chairman, this is Michael Lynch. I would like to apologize for Jenny Betzworth. This is the building designed by Reed and Stem, the other architects for Grand Central Terminal. I was confused with the Vanderbilt house. So a correction to the record and apologies to Jenny.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the board regarding the New York Central Power Station?
It's Carol Clark. I just wanted to note that I found it so impressive that Reed and Stem competed against 4 other firms, and it included Daniel Burnham's firm and McKim, Mead & White. So it's really interesting that they got the commission, and then, of course, they collaborated with Warren and Wetmore, who also worked with them on Grand Central.
This is Wint. What is the reuse going to be for this extraordinary building? Do we know?
This is Daniel. I do know and was about to offer it into discussion. This building is such a familiar sight for anyone who commutes on Metro North or takes Amtrak between Albany and New York. This building has been under one owner for a decade plus. The current plan, which is appears to be attracting significant support, is to develop this as a center dedicated to climate change research. And there appear to be emerging partnerships with academic institutions such as MIT and other incubator science initiatives. So it could be a rather grand reuse right there on the waterfront.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments about the New York Central Power Station? Do I hear a motion?
Paul Clark, so moved.
This is Erica. I'll second. Our agency has had some involvement in this with some code questions, but I don't think that would prevent me from still voting on this.
Agreed. Any abstain or opposed?
No, I just wanted to second it. That's all.
Yep.
That's fine.
Thank you. Objections or abstentions? There being none, this is approved by unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to Weathersfield.
Mr. Chairman, before we move on, is Kevin McMahon on the line, and does he wish to add any comments? Apparently not. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Moving on to Weathersfield and Armenia, and Chelsea, take it away.
Okay, so my last presentation for today, this is Weathersfield, which is the former country estate of Chauncey D. Stillman, located in Armenia, Dutchess County. The property demonstrates statewide significance under Criterion A in the area of conservation as an exemplar of conservation management that pioneered water and soil conservation and forestry and habitat restoration in Dutchess County's agricultural landscape. It is also significant in the area of entertainment and recreation as a particularly well-designed and unique coda to the American country place era. Next slide. The house and gardens are significant under Criterion C in the areas of architecture and landscape architecture as the works of Masters Lafarge and Knox, Brian J. Lynch, and Evelyn N. Poehler. The collection of resources within the 1,000-acre estate boundary is extensive and multidimensional, including buildings, sites, structures, and objects. Overall, there are 51 contributing resources and 7 non-contributing. Next slide. At its heart, the property's focal point is the rambling 2-story brick Georgian Revival house designed by the New York firm Lafarge and Knox in 1939. Many of the estate rooms feature restrained interiors with plain plaster walls and simple but elegant moldings and well-crafted paneling. Other rooms, like the flower room shown here in the bottom left photo, has a more classically inspired decorative design. Next slide, please. The only addition to the house, the Gloriette, is an airy 1-story pavilion. It was designed by architect George F. Poehler and built in 1971. The space features marble mosaic floors and walls and a coved ceiling with frescoes done by the Italian artist Pietro Angioni. Next slide. Stillman employed several additional architects throughout the development of Weathersfield. These individuals were largely charged with the designing ancillary structures, while Lafarge and Knox completed the main house. The first building on the property commissioned by Stillman was the stable, as seen here in the top image, completed in 1937, 2 years before the house. Next slide. The gardens make up approximately 5 acres of the Weathersfield estate. Between 1940 and the mid-1970s, Stillman, along with landscape architects Brian Lynch and Evelyn Poehler, developed these classically inspired landscapes, which are managed today according to the extensive plans and planting documentation left behind by the architects. Next slide. The gardens can be thought of in 2 design styles, the arts and crafts garden and the classical garden. The primary areas of the arts and crafts garden include the inner garden, south and pine terraces, Beach Tunnel, and the Lime Walk. These gardens are sited closest to the house and follow the popularized English garden aesthetic of mixed formal and architectural elements with lush naturalistic borders and planting beds to create structured garden rooms. Next slide. The classical gardens include the Water Garden, LA, Naiad Fountain, East Garden, Cutting Garden, and the Belvedere. Pictured here is the LA and the Naiad Fountain, both as it appeared in 1944 and today. Next slide. These larger classical gardens are organized primarily on a central east-west axis, which is centered on the house's main dining room. Statuary and other designed elements punctuate these gardens, as seen here with the classically inspired Belvedere from 1965 and the oval reflecting pool. Next slide. Southwest of the house is Evelyn Poehler's design for the 7-acre wilderness walk, executed in the 1960s and 70s. Reached by a carriage path, the wilderness walk winds through woodland laid out with meandering pathways punctuated by classically inspired sculpture. The system of carriage drives within the designed landscape were created to accommodate Stillman's hobby of hackney carriage driving. Next slide. Stillman, in partnership with estate manager Owen Boyd, piloted reforestation, habitat restoration, water conservation, and soil remediation efforts on a scale and scope that influenced local and state landscape rehabilitation efforts. So influential were their practices that Wethersfield was the subject of a UN visit and several demonstration days in the late 1940s and early 1950s. By the 60s, Stillman was advocating for pesticide-free land management and later banned the use of chemical herbicides altogether. Next slide. Overall, the house and gardens, along with the broader working landscape and accessory buildings, retain a high degree of integrity and have been well maintained. The house has remained virtually unchanged, and though the landscape has matured over the years and some plantings have been restored or rehabilitated, Wethersfield remains strongly reflective of this period of significance. And that is Wethersfield. Any questions?
Questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, hold on. I think does Carrie Culhane, the consultant, I think, Carrie, are you on the line? Did you want to add anything?
Sorry, Carrie, I was juggling the mute with you.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Oh, sorry, that was fighting you there. Sorry.
Thanks, Carrie.
Thank you all and thank you, Chelsea, for that wonderful presentation. You really captured Wethersfield's story in a nutshell, and it is a really deep and multi-layered story, and one that's really fascinating. And I want to thank my clients for inviting me to uncover a lot of it. It's really, I can't say enough about what a fascinating place this is, and the fact that it is publicly accessible, that this remarkable place is made available to the public by the board that now manages it, is just a great asset to the state of New York. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. And I just wanted to add, I'm not sure if Chelsea mentioned that we are arguing for a statewide level of significance for this property.
Mr. Chairman, this is Wint. I'd just like to say that that I knew Chauncey Stillman and I know his two daughters. This extraordinary property is very much as it was 50 years ago. And I think the nomination has been very thorough and is extremely persuasive about the importance of Wethersfield. The whole operation there went through a tough time after Mr. Stillman's death because of some management problems. It's clearly now out of the woods and out in the open, sunlit uplands. The landscape, particularly, of course, is his crowning feature. And I'd be very happy to move its approval.
Thank you, Win. If there are no other comments, we'll seek a second.
This is Kristen. I'll second.
Any objections or abstentions? There being none, this is approved by unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Moving on to James Carter and the Harder Mill in Rensselaer.
Thank you. The Harder Manufacturing Company, Albany Woolen Company mill building comes to us as part of a commercial tax credit rehabilitation project with a Part 1 application already approved by MPS. The mill is located at 2 Green Street in the city of Rensselaer, Rensselaer County. This early 20th century light industrial manufacturing building features 3 stories over a basement with a flat roof with simple parapet. The front and side walls are constructed of textured concrete blocks. The facade includes an entryway with a 3-story projecting stair tower at the center, flanked on each side by 7 bays, each defined by paired windows. Next slide, please. The side elevations are organized with 5 bays of paired window openings, each with concrete lintels and sills. Next slide, please. The rear elevation, given its minimal visibility from a public right-of-way, was constructed of brick rather than concrete. There was an original 1-story square wing that projects off the rear wall. This 1-story wing served as the boiler room for the finishing mill. Today it serves as a garage with a large double-wide overhead door opening on the south wall. At the center of the rear elevation, there is also a 3-story extension, which includes the original freight elevator tower, as well as a non-historic addition. Next slide, please. On the interior, each of the 3 floors is characterized by a large open space with high ceilings of beaded tongue and groove boards supported by heavy timber beams and posts running the width of the building. The first floor includes a series of 4 10 by 11 foot offices along the front wall. Next slide, please. The mill was built between 1906 and 1907 by William A. Harder, local inventor and leader in the regional textile industry. Harder was being prevented by his competition from manufacturing both raw materials and finished goods in Columbia County and needed to construct a mill in another location. He chose Rensselaer for its transportation advantages and supporting textile workforce. Harder hired well-known Hudson architect Michael J. O'Connor to design the building. The mill served the Harder Manufacturing Company as a finishing mill for raw materials produced at the company's Falacia factory until Harder could relocate his entire enterprise back to Columbia County in 1918. The building was then purchased by the Barnett family, a large and successful family of local manufacturers who owned numerous textile-related enterprises throughout the area. The brothers Willis and Jeffy Barnett ran the mill as the Albany Woolen Company for a variety of textile-related functions, including knitting and waste recycling, until operations ceased in 1964. Next slide, please. The mill served as an important local industrial facility with an average of 200 workers involved in its operations throughout its period of significance. The standard structural details of late 19th century industrial buildings were combined with new advances in building materials from the turn of the 20th century, including preformed concrete block and precast concrete sills and lintels. This allowed for efficient yet durable construction, which contributes to the building's integrity today. These details and materials represent the beginning of a gradual shift in architectural design concepts for industrial buildings through the mid-20th century. And that concludes the Harder Mill.
We do have the consultant, I think, on the line, Kim
check.
Alvarez. I don't know if.
I don't believe Kim is here.
No, okay.
No guests?
No.
Apparently not.
Okay, any comments or questions from people listening or the board?
Windows have all been changed.
Do I hear a motion regarding the Harder Mill?
This is Kristen. I'll move it.
Kristen moves. Do I hear?
This is Wayne Goodman. I'll second that.
Any objections or abstentions? There being none, it is approved by unanimous consent. And James will move on to Coxsackie Village Cemetery.
Great. The Village of Coxsackie Cemetery is located on the west side of Mansion Street, near the center of the Village of Coxsackie, a certified local government in Greene County. It is located on approximately 1 acre of associated land, the perimeter of which is bounded by cast iron fencing. Next slide, please. Most of the early stones were crafted from marble and are simple in design, lacking any substantial embellishment. A number of these early stones exhibit a uniform appearance, a reflection of period taste in funerary art, and the limited range of contemporary period types. The inscriptions are located on the west side of the stones, thereby facing away from the entrance to the cemetery. It is believed that in its earliest form, the cemetery entrance may have been on the opposite end of the property and was moved as travel routes changed in the village. Next slide, please. The cast iron perimeter fencing is also in disrepair, and several sections of it are presently in a collapsed state. Many of the stones and portions of the fence have been recently cleaned and rehabilitated thanks to the efforts of the community. and further rehabilitation efforts are planned and underway. And next slide, please. The cemetery contains the burials of many important and founding families of the village of Coxsackie. Their stones represent a variety of the types typical to the cemetery. These include the graves of Appenitus Reed, who is considered the founder of the village's commercial center and one of the founders of the cemetery. Next slide, please. William Hermance, I believe it's Hermance. William Hermance was the founder and first president of the National Bank of Coxsackie, and his family is buried there. Next slide, please. The village of Coxsackie is located on land claimed by Peter Bronk in 1662. The land was confirmed by the colonial governor and named the Coxsackie Patent. The Bronk family were among Coxsackie's earliest settlers and contributed greatly to its prosperity. Next slide, please. Albert Parker was elected to the New York State Assembly in 1879. He was elected the same year as supervisor of the town. He was also president of the Coxsackie Savings Institution and was president of the village in 1882 and 1883. Next slide, please. There are several veterans buried in the cemetery, including the veteran of the American Revolutionary War, Philip Conine Jr. Philip was a captain in command of a detachment of militia stationed in Catskill Valley during the Revolutionary War. Next slide. The cemetery contains a characteristic array of funerary art spanning the 19th and early to mid-20th centuries. Characteristic neoclassical motifs, such as the urn and willow tree, were not widely employed, but nevertheless appear on some examples. The mid-19th century is marked by cut stone markers featuring raised inscriptions and having squared heads. During the third quarter of the 19th century, tablets with peaked and rounded heads came into more common usage. Next slide, please. Some of the family plots have simple, small stones that mark the graves of young children. Despite the restrained manner in terms of size and text, some of these stones do contain fairly detailed funerary art. Next slide, please. Stones from the latter stages of the 19th century and into the 20th century are markedly different in many aspects from those of the first 3 quarters of the 19th century. Many of the stones from this period are more considerable in size and were often crafted from granite, with both polished and rough-hewn surfaces. Bases consisting of both 1 and 2 parts became a standard feature by this time. That concludes the presentation, but I'd like to give special thanks to Betty Cure, the village historian, and Dan Beechler for his wonderful tour of the site, and to my colleague Bill Krattinger for his work drafting the nomination. Also, I'd like to recognize the village community for their continued preservation of the cemetery through donations and volunteer efforts. So thank you.
Thank you, James. Well done. It's a beautiful cemetery. Any guests or comments or questions from the board? Do I hear a motion? Was somebody going to make a comment?
I was just going to say, we do have a guest here, but he didn't want to speak. So thank you to Dan Beechler for being here today.
Thank you for recognizing that person. If there are no comments from the board, I'm seeking a motion.
This is Jay. I'll make a motion.
I would be happy to second that motion and ask for any objections or abstentions. There being none, this is approved by unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone. All right, moving on to Malone Downtown Historic District and a presentation by Dan Bagro.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Located in Franklin County, north of the blue line of the Adirondack Park, the Malone Downtown Historic District is significant under Criterion A in the areas of commerce and industry due to the village's role as a prominent commercial, manufacturing, and transportation hub from a period spanning the mid-19th to mid-20th centuries. Next slide, please. The origin of this rise to prominence is due to the village's siting on the Salmon River and its selection as the county seat in 1808. The mid to later 19th century's sharp rise in population and the increase of village services was due to the opening of the Northern Railroad in 1850 and the subsequent growth of several industries, including hops cultivation, wool, and paper production, as well as the impacts of exporting from the farming and logging industries in the communities surrounding the village. Next slide, please. The increase in population is directly responsible for the district seen today, which is largely commercial, with predominantly 2 to 3 story commercial buildings that served as stores on the ground floor and offices and storage above. The district also includes numerous building types reflective of this era, including a hotel, a former rail station, a post office, and multiple banks, as well as buildings reflecting the industrial and manufacturing eras. Next slide, please. The proposed district is also significant under criterion C in the area of architecture as an assemblage containing a dense grouping of architecturally intact commercial, civic, religious, and industrial resources. Typical of many main streets in New York State, the district contains examples from the period including Greek and Gothic revivals, the late Victorian period, Italianate, Romanesque, and late 19th and 20th century colonial and classical revival style buildings. Next slide, please. Due to the absence of major development pressure during the later 20th and 21st centuries, the district has retained its later 19th and early 20th century Main Street character and architectural integrity. Next slide, please. The period of significance for the proposed Malone Downtown Historic District is 1846 to circa 1950. The period begins with the oldest extant building in the district, the Paddock Block, and spans the subsequent growth and development that occurred as a result of the initial construction of the railroad, increase in manufacturing, and the population boom and peak. Next slide, please. The period concludes circa 1950 with the construction of the last contributing building in the district, an automobile shop, and mid-century building alterations that demonstrate a final period of population stability. The roughly 100-year period reflected by the district encompasses a period of time where the village flourished, strengthened connections with more distant communities and markets, overcame natural and man-made disasters, and became the hub of activity in Franklin County. This nomination was sponsored by the Malone Revitalization Foundation and written by Christine Bush of Arch, with contributions and editing by myself and Dan McEnany. One letter of support was received from a property owner in the district. No letter of objections were received. And Christine Bush and Mary Scharf from the Malone Revitalization Foundation are listening in today, and I'd like to give them an opportunity to speak if they would like to.
Hi, Dan and board. This is Christine Bush from Arch, and I just really want to commend the Malone Revitalization Foundation for pushing ahead with this nomination. It's been a couple of years in the making, and it's going to really be a great benefit to the community. And thank you, Dan, for all your hard work and dedication to this nomination.
Thank you. Other comments, questions from the board?
I would like to comment. This is Mary Scarf, President of Malone Revitalization Foundation, as well as the Chamber of Commerce.
Excellent.
This is very, very important to Malone. And the reason is we need to have investment. We need to make it the tourist destination it should be. When New York State Parks and Recreation came to visit us 4 years ago to give us the go-ahead, they told us that we had about 300 buildings only next to Saratoga in New York State. They told us to divide it into 3 parts, so you're going to see us back again. Malone is on the Canadian border. We're an hour drive from Montreal and an hour drive from Lake Placid. So we're in the middle, but we need something for people to stop and stay overnight and spend their money. We have the Wilder Homestead right next door, and 4 miles away. That's where it's the farmer boy home. And people do stop there and visit. But if we had a historic district and all of our residential homes were listed, it would give more incentive for people to stay overnight and invest in our community. We have an investor that did come in recently as a part of reading about our homes and buildings. He bought the River Building, which is 5,000 square feet. It is almost totally redone. It has a commercial downstairs, a restaurant. It has housing upstairs and a business center. And this summer they'll be building a deck which will be right over the Salmon River. So it does make a difference to have the nomination approved. It'll make a big difference to our economy. And I also want to thank Assemblyman Billy Jones and Senator Betty Little, the Mayor Dumas of Malone, and Supervisor Stewart of the town of Malone for supporting us.
Thank you, Mary. We're certainly happy to hear those comments and to see Malone moving in that direction. Other questions or comments from the board or guests?
This is Michael. Dan, the lower left-hand picture that's on the screen, those two octagonal towers, could you explain what those are?
Yes, so that is the ticketing office and freight office for the Rutland Railroad, which took over, I think, the Northern Railroad around 1901, I believe. And it is, I believe, a bank now, but I'd have to go back and check the records.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mary, this is Daniel McKay. I oversee the Division for Historic Preservation. This is certainly a huge first step for Malone, and we're so pleased to understand really the depth of support as you described for this nomination. This is the gateway designation for state grant programs, the state and federal rehabilitation tax credits, not only for your commercial district there on Main Street, but for historic residential housing in Malone as well. So I will reach out to you on the side and begin a discussion about how we can direct your attention and direct our staff to provide you with additional information about the incentives that this listing opens up for you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. Comments from the board? Do you want to hear a motion?
Carol Clark, so moved.
Second?
This is Wind. I'll second.
Any objections or abstentions from the board? There being none, it is approved by unanimous consent. Thank you, everyone. And Dan, we move now to Tahawa's Masonic Lodge.
The Tahawa's Masonic Lodge is located on Main Street in the hamlet of Ausable Forks, Essex County, and is being nominated in association with Criterion A in the area of social history and Criterion C in the area of architecture at the local significance level with a period of significance from 1911 to 1971. Next slide, please. Built in 1911, the lodge was commissioned by the members of the Tahawa's Lodge 790 Free and Associated Masons and served as the primary gathering space for Lodge 790 and the Lebanon Star Chapter 150 of the Order of the Eastern Star, an independent Masonic organization. The Freemasons and Eastern Stars were two of the most prominent fraternal organizations in Ausable Forks. These groups hosted public events and interacted frequently with other Masonic organizations in the Adirondacks. Events frequently took place inside the lodge, which served as a major local gathering space, in addition to a gathering space for private Masonic ceremonies. Next slide, please. The lodge is a rectangular, front gambreled, 4-story, 3-bay, smooth parge-finished concrete building. The lodge utilizes a reinforced, poured-in-place concrete structural system with hollow clay tile infill. The facade features a prominent storefront system, which is a restoration of the original based on photographic documentation. Next slide, please. After constructing the lodge, the members rented the building's basement and first floor to various commercial and civic interests and used the second and third floors for lodge club rooms. This impacted the interior finishes present throughout the building, with the basement a utilitarian space, the first floor displaying finishes such as pressed tin ceilings. Next slide, please. And the upper floors consisting of open volume space suitable for large gatherings. Aside from the storefront restoration, the building's exterior remains as it appeared in 1911, with the interior spaces having also largely been maintained in their original configuration. In addition to serving as the club rooms of the local fraternal groups, the Tahawus Masonic Lodge served for decades as the local post office, while the Adirondack Record newspaper used the building's basement as a printing shop. Next slide, please. The building is one of only 3 buildings to survive the devastating 1925 fire, which engulfed much of Au Forks, and as a result, it is one of the oldest buildings in the community. For reference, in the top left picture, the Masonic Lodge is the building in the back left, and the building on the photo on the right is obviously after the fire. The period of significance reflects a period of prosperity in Au Forks, tied largely to the J.J. Rogers pulp mill, which employed a significant portion of the local population. The mill's shuttering in 1971 led to an extended downturn in the local economy, with the local fraternal organizations abandoning the lodge soon after the mill closed. Next slide, please. Since 2008, the building has been owned by a nonprofit organization, the Appleby Foundation, and they have worked to renovate and restore the building while adapting the building's interior into office space, a gallery, and a ballet studio. This nomination was written by Matthew Schoen, a graduate student at the University of Vermont, and edited by myself and Dan McEnany. I believe that Matt is with us today, so I'd like to give him an opportunity to speak if you'd like to.
Yeah, thank you. I guess all I can really say in this moment is that I'm very, very grateful for all the help Dan gave me for this nomination. He was very kind to deal with me reaching out and working through a couple of projects that weren't quite what we needed for this, for my capstone project. And I'm just really grateful that he was willing to get me in touch with Rebecca and Craig, who own the building, and that he helped shepherd this nomination through. And as just kind of final thing, I will say that this is the first building in Au Forks to be listed potentially on the National Register of Historic Places. Mm-hmm. And I know that Rebecca and Craig were very eager for that to be done, for the sheer fact that they believe that many more buildings in Little Village are eligible. And they hope that by putting their building on the register, that they can jumpstart a lot of other people to make that consideration and make that listing possible. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Matt. Anyone else want to comment, or is there a question from the board about the Tahawus Masonic Lodge?
This is Kristen, and if I may, I just had a couple quick comments. First of all, it's always gratifying from my perspective to see a historic building in use, particularly by a non-profit arts organization. So that's a wonderful thing. And I wanted to compliment what might seem like a minor part of the nomination, but because the discussion of materials was so important, having the image of the hollow clay tile included, which was on page 26, was really helpful to me to understand the construction. And I understand that this was in addition by the person who just spoke. So thank you so much for including it.
Thank you, Kristen. Any other comments or a motion? Well, I will certainly move it. Does anyone want a second?
This is Wayne. Good. I'll second it.
Any objections or abstentions? There being none, it is approved by unanimous consent. Thank you. We will move now to New York City row houses and Linda Mackey.
Okay, hi there, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. I always like to double check. Okay, so the row houses at 854 to 858 West End Avenue and 254 West 102nd Street are significant under Criterion C in the area of architecture as an intact group of 4 Queen Anne and Romanesque style row houses designed by the firm of Schneider and Herder. The period of significance is 1892 to 1893, reflecting the construction of the 4 buildings. Located in Manhattan's Upper West Side, this group is the sole surviving example of a type of site planning used on several corner plots along West End Ave in the early 1890s, where a group of brownstones facing the avenue featured a prominent corner house and a house facing the side street behind the avenue-facing houses. All 4 buildings are designated New York City individual landmarks and are also within the boundaries of the locally designated Riverside West End Historic District Extension 2. Next slide, please. Improved public transportation to the area, such as the elevated rail in 1879, contributed to the growth and sustained development of the Upper West Side. The creation of the Riverside Park and Drive along the Hudson River was also an important factor in making this area desirable for upscale residential development. Real estate brochures and local press drew attention to the area, emphasizing the scenic quality of the setting, the nearness of parks, and easy commute south to jobs, shopping, and entertainment venues. Speaking to this corner development pattern, it maximized the lot through the creation of a side street house that allowed for an effective use of the land and creation of a prestigious corner house. By decreasing the depth of the avenue-facing houses, an additional house could be built on the plot facing the side street. And this plan worked to the advantage of the developer who sought a maximum return. The nominated district is enclosed by a red polygon on the 1891 map, and the photo on the lower right shows the row houses upon completion in 1893. Next slide, please. The era of the West End neighborhood as a haven for affluent families residing in single-family homes would be short-lived. By the early years of the 20th century, many of the single-family homes and small flats, which were less than 30 years old at the time, were demolished and replaced with grand apartment buildings. Factors that led to this extraordinary fast transformation include the opening of the IRT subway in 1904. Land values then skyrocketed, making the construction of new row houses no longer economically viable. Also, the row houses were considered stylistically out of fashion. And similar to corner developments at the nominated property, they were demolished as part of this transition. Next slide, please. The nominated district of Queen Anne and Romanesque-style row houses is also reflective of the larger movement against the uniformity of earlier Italianate rows and are characteristic of the early eclectic development of West End Avenue. The treatment of each of the four buildings individually within the easily recognizable group provided the architects the opportunity to create variations on a theme. The high degree of modulation in the plane of the facades through the use of recessed entrances, as well as projecting bay windows and balconies, which originally afforded views of the river and park, adds depth and grandeur to the designs. The repetition of several ornamental elements unite the houses, including paired string horses, gridded panels of rough gray stone, and chamfered window surrounds. We have a letter of support from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, and we also have an approved Part 1 commercial tax credit application for 254 West 100th Street. And we actually have the owners of 254 on the call, Patricia and Peter Chick. I wasn't sure if you want to say a few words.
We'll say a very few words. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. We wanted to let you know that we bought this house in 1972, back when it was renovated. Ever since, we spent a great deal of time and effort restoring it. The photo that you have here, unfortunately, shows the facade before the massive restoration that we did, that we finished 2 years ago. And we wanted to say many thanks to Jennifer Betsworthy, who shepherded us through the early part of our Part 1 application, and to Linda Mackey, who has prepared this presentation, and from which we've actually learned some things we didn't know before. So thanks a lot. That's it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Questions from the board? Do I hear a motion?
Carol Clark, I'm happy to move this nomination. I lived 4 blocks away from these properties for some dozen years.
Oh, neat.
And
That's
this is
great.
Jay. I'll second it.
All right, Carol Clark moves, Jay seconds. Any objections or abstentions? There being none, it is approved by unanimous consent. And now to the church in New York City. Linda Mackey, please.
Great. Okay, so the Church of the Heavenly Rest and Chapel of the Beloved Disciple is located on Fifth Avenue at the southeast corner of East 90th Street in the Carnegie Hill neighborhood of Manhattan. It is a steel-reinforced concrete complex designed in the neo-Gothic style with Deco-style ironwork and modern-style architectural sculpture. It includes a church and chapel oriented toward Fifth Avenue and a parish hall facing East 90th Street that are seamlessly integrated into a single building plan and designed by Hardy Phillip of the firm Mayers, Murray & Phillip. The church is nationally significant under Criterion C in the area's architecture, engineering, and art, spanning a period of significance beginning in 1926 at the start of construction to the final installation of its stained glass windows in 1944. It is a remarkable testament to the singular vision of Hardy Phillip, a protege of master architect Bertram Goodhue, who not only embodied but also advanced his mentor's legacy of marrying historic forms with modern technologies and styles through a fruitful collaboration with an accomplished engineer and the leading artists, artisans, and designers of the period. Next slide, please. A 14-year veteran of the firm at the time of Goodhue's death, Hardy Phillip was instrumental in completing some of Goodhue's most pioneering, enduring works years after his death that included St. Bartholomew's Church in New York and the Nebraska State Capitol, both National Historic Landmarks. In this regard, the nominated property represents the work of Hardy Phillip, a notable but less recognized architect of the Goodhue firm, who created a masterpiece that skillfully incorporated architecture, engineering, and art into a nationally significant ecclesiastical design. Next slide, please. Andrew Carnegie purchased the site where the church would be built to protect his home from threatened intrusion of a tall apartment house. He cleared the property, and the empty lot served as a tennis court during the warmer months and an ice skating rink during the colder months. It was his widow, Louise, who ultimately decided that the only acceptable development would be a church no taller than 75 feet, except for the steeple, which could rise higher. Next slide, please. The building committee for the new church consisted of members from each congregation. This committee was tasked with selecting an architect, as well as determining the appearance of the building and how it would respond to each congregation's needs. Some of the requirements for the building included all pews in the church to be put within direct view of the chancel, no columns or other architectural interference, an organ with no pipe showing. They must build a church for today and tomorrow, and the type of architecture should be Gothic, but Gothic in a distinctly modern way. The committee also had a list of qualifications for the architect. Freedom of the key individual to devote all necessary time without delegating to a subordinate, a younger man or group of men, since a church commission of this magnitude is always spread over a period of years and may be termed never finished, and a definite Gothic background from previous experience with a complete working knowledge of this type, not merely academic. The committee cited Hardy Phillip and his firm's expertise, their membership with professional design organizations, and their long-standing association with Goodhue. Next slide, please. Phillip's design for the church employed Gothic forms in new and unexpected ways that transcended traditional norms of period revival architecture, resulting in a more restrained treatment that emphasized monumentality over ornamentation. Further, it harnessed the latest technologies of its time that included a limestone curtain wall anchored by a steel-reinforced concrete shell, along with the state-of-the-art sound, lighting, and broadcasting systems that were discreetly placed behind decorative elements. Phillip enlisted Emil Prager to resolve the engineering challenges and fulfill a requirement set by the committee. Prager's resume included chief engineer for New York City Parks under Moses, and he was named Metropolitan Engineer of the Year, designing Graceline Pier 57 on the Hudson River. Also, during World War II, most notably, he devised a breakwater system that was constructed to protect the harbor for landing and supplying operations during the Battle of Normandy. With these accomplishments, Prager was an easy choice. Next slide. While interior decor can be fleeting and often changed with the fashion at times, architectural sculpture, by its very nature of being set in stone, is an enduring art form. Perhaps nowhere is this more apparent than at the nominated property, where multiple sculptors collaborated on an array of distinctive works that were either designed by or in collaboration with Hardy Phillip. As such, the property is significant for possessing high artistic values, as exemplified by the combined talents of some of America's greatest architectural sculptors and stone carvers, who executed Philip's vision for the complex, including, and I'm only going to name a few, Lee Laurie, sculptor. He assisted many of the sculptures working on World Columbian Exposition of 1893 and the chapel at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. And in the photo on the left is a baptistry in the first floor of the church, and on the right is the reredos. Next slide, please. We also have Melina Hoffman. One of her best-known works was a series of 105 figures, busts, and heads that she produced for Chicago's Field Museum between 1930 and 1933, entitled Races of Mankind. John Donnelly, in 1890, he was part of a team of over 100 stone carvers working on Cornelius Vanderbilt's mansion on 57th Street, and also the Central Branch of Newark Public Library, Grand Central Terminal, and the Woolworth Building. Earl Thorpe, he was a WPA artist whose works were featured in the United States Post Office in Georgia and the War Department building in DC. And lastly, for stained glass window designers, J. Gordon Guthrie and James Humphrey Hogan worked for Tiffany's Glass Company and later several significant New York City projects, including St. Bart's and Riverside Church. And in these photos, we have the pulpit on the left, one of the winged figures on the chancel arch on the right, and then we have the chair niches and the chancel. Next slide, please. Many of the artists, artisans, and designers collaborated with Philip and Goodhue on other projects in New York City and throughout the U.S. Bios and a complete list of all who worked on this nominated property are included in the nomination. And again, this national significance is really derived from this melding of architecture, art, and engineering, and the collaboration of some of the best practitioners of the period, who enabled Hardy Philip to achieve his vision and create a modern, sleek, neo-Gothic church that incorporated the latest technologies and an impressive array of sculpture, metalwork, and distinctive stained glass windows. And the photos on the left and the top right-hand corner are of the chapel, and on the bottom right is Darlington Hall in the Parish Hall. We have a letter of support from the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission, and on the line we do have Gregory Dietrich, who authored the nomination, and also from the church we have Ruth Ann Gianetto, Gail Zimmerman, and I think I saw Matt Cade. Hopefully I pronounced your names correctly. Did anyone want to say a few words?
Well, let me just start by saying thank you for your consideration of this. It is our hope and our goal to sustain this beautiful place for our children and grandchildren, and not only for people, members of the church, but for the neighborhood as a whole. And so that's been our focus, and we appreciate your help in that sustainability.
Any other comments from visitors?
This is Gregory Dietrich, and I just wanted to say that I'm thrilled to see this nomination moving forward, and would like to just thank Linda Mackey and Kathy Howe for their insightful comments, as well as the church leadership for moving this nomination along. I think all of us have probably been served at one point in our lives or another by mentors. And to me, this church really embodies the fruitful result that can come through mentorship. In this case, Hardy Philip, the architect of this building, who joined Goodhue's firm in 1914. So he was there actually for a considerable time. And I think what's sort of wonderful is with Goodhue's untimely death in 1924, he really took the ball and ran with it with the successor firm of Mayers, Murray, and Philip. And I just find this particular building endlessly fascinating. And I have to also say that I was not aware of the substantial holdings at Avery Architectural Drawings Archive. So that took me down, of course, a whole other path with respect to the research that also proved to be very fruitful in the end.
All right. Any other comments by visitors about this property or questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman, this is Wint. The one thing that I wasn't clear, this is a magnificent building and a fascinating one and a very, very strong nomination. well documented. But I'm a little unclear about the chapel and the cafe. Has a cafe been inserted into the chapel? Or is it in the basement of the chapel? Or is there, in fact, no cafe and I misunderstood that?
Oh, yes, there is a cafe, and I think the photo does show it as you enter the chapel, that entrance area. It's not in the PowerPoint presentation, but it is one of the photos attached to the nomination. But the chapel itself is in the last slide. So the chapel itself has not been touched. It is intact. And then I'm not sure, Gregory, if there's anything else you would like to add?
Sure, I'd be happy to speak to that. The cafe has been incorporated into what was formerly known as the cloister or chapel entrance. So the chapel that you see in the photos is what you see today. And as you head toward Fifth Avenue, there's this cloistered area with this wonderful low-scale Gothic vaulting that has been preserved and incorporated into the cafe design.
Thank you. That explains the matter. Appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Do I hear a motion?
Carol Clark, I'd like to move this one.
I'll second it. This is Wind.
Excellent. Any objections or abstentions from the board? There being none, it is approved by unanimous consent. And we move to our 16th nomination for today, and Dan Boggs at Nichols Park. Dan, are you ready?
Hi, it appears like Dan might be having some technical difficulties. If you could bear with us for just a moment. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yes, sounds good.
Okay, great. I had to switch microphones there. Sorry.
No problem.
All right. Nichols Park in Spencer, Tioga County, is significant under Criterion A, Recreation and Culture, and Criterion C, Architecture, for the 1923 wood frame grandstand present in the park. The park is a period of significance of 1863 to 1967. In 1855, Spencer, New York businessman John Avery Nichols purchased 67 acres adjacent to the village. Here he built an elegant home, known locally as Nichols Villa, and began to make improvements to the surrounding landscape consistent with the ideals of the picturesque movement. Next slide, please. In 1863, John Nichols subdivided his land and laid out Nichols Park with an eye to beautification and function. Next slide, please. Trees were planted, some of which remain to this day, and the pond expanded and improved. Next slide, please. Nichols Pond formed a key feature of the park, defining the character of its eastern half. The pond not only enhanced the beauty of the park, but served as a recreational facility in its own right for such activities as rowboating in the summer and ice skating in the winter. Although Nichols Park was privately owned by Mr. Nichols and 3 subsequent owners, it was always made available and open for public use. Throughout the 19th century, the park served as a focal point and gathering place for community events, including reunions held by Civil War veterans, picnics, and baseball games. When the town took over responsibility for the park in 1919, new facilities were planned and constructed. Next slide, please. The park had long served as a home for baseball games. References to the park serving as the home field of the Spencer Baseball Club trace to the 1880s. The town of Spencer commissioned the construction of a grandstand and concession stand to meet the needs of Spencer's baseball fans. Next slide, please. The 1923 wood frame grandstand features 10 rows of wood bleachers with the capacity to seat several hundred people. A 2018 conditions assessment report for the grandstand at Nichols Park, prepared by Crawford and Stearns Architects and Preservation Planners of Syracuse, New York, proposed certain items of maintenance and repairs, but found the grandstand to be in relatively good condition and recommended the building for National Register consideration. Surviving examples of wood frame grandstands are rare in New York State, most having succumbed to fire or demolition. In researching this nomination, only 2 others were identified. The grandstand is designed in the shape of a chevron or shallow V, with the interior measurements of each wing being approximately 41 feet. Next slide, please. To help protect attendees from the weather, a metal roof was added in 1926, along with booth spaces to the rear of the building underneath the bleachers. To improve the space available, construction of the booths included an expansion from the rear exterior wall covered by a shed roof. Several openings for the booths hinge on the bottom and can be swung down partway and propped to act as tables on which to display merchandise, displays, and concessions, a purpose for which they continue to serve today. Next slide, please. The concession stand itself also continues to serve the purpose for which it was built in 1923. It is of similar material and wood frame construction as the grandstand and is placed just to the north of it, where it can be easily accessed by patrons. Next slide, please. The town of Spencer continued to make improvements to Nichols Park, suited to the recreational needs of its citizens. Signage and benches, gravel trails, small bridges, horseshoe pits, boat docks are some of the amenities the town has provided. Prominent among these additions is the Jeanette McCaskill Bingo Pavilion, built in 1953. Over the years, the bingo games held at this pavilion have proven to be a very popular tradition at Nichols Park, particularly during the Spencer picnic. Jeanette McCaskill was an avid bingo player who helped run the games for decades. These games continue to be organized by members of the Spencer Picnic Committee, most recently comprised of volunteers from the Spencer Chamber of Commerce, the Village Board, and the community at large. Next slide, please. Still used for recreational activities, such as fishing, boating, skating, birdwatching, leisurely walks, weddings, and of course, baseball and the annual Spencer Picnic, Nichols Park, its grandstand and facilities, is the cultural heartbeat and key component of the community identity of Spencer, New York. This nomination was prepared by Abby Hendrickson, Community Development Specialist, Tioga County Department of Economic Development and Planning, with the assistance of William Cradinger and myself of the New York State Historic Preservation Office. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Is there any guests or comments from people listening? Barring that, are there questions about this nomination from the board? Do I hear a motion?
Carol Clark, so moved.
And Lucy for second.
Sue Waletsky seconds the motion. Any objections or abstentions for Nichols Park? There being none, it is approved by unanimous consent, and that represents our last nomination of the day. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Moving on to new business. New business is our next agenda item, and I believe that consists primarily of upcoming dates in 2021 for state review board meetings. Michael?
Mr. Chair, before we do that, I wanted to offer Chuck Vandry an opportunity to give us an update on the work that he was completing in Lake George, if he's still on the line.
Excellent.
He is here, I believe. We're trying to unmute him.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear us, Chuck?
I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Chuck.
Go ahead.
Okay. Kind of double between the computer and the phone here. I just like to update the board and just inform everyone that we finally completed work on the Cortlandt Street Cemetery. Just at the day after Veterans Day this year, the utilities were installed on site and the archaeological crew was present. And over the next several days, we recovered an additional seven individuals were found during the installation of the utility trench. So the site's done. We're talking about a nomination, which I'd like to discuss with Kathy at some point.
Chuck, based on the position of the human remains that were discovered, do you have any sense of a cemetery structure or any better knowledge of the nature of this site based on what you found, given these difficult circumstances?
The cemetery, there is a cemetery up there that is rather large, and it may well extend from Canada Street all the way up the hill, and the intervening blocks in between. We've in the course of research on this project, we found many newspaper accounts dating back to the middle of the 19th century of graves being found at various places, basically all around the area. So we're surrounded. And since these individuals seem to be from the 1776 hospital, which we believe there were well over 1,000 died in that hospital that summer. So they're buried up there on that hill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck.
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. Moving on to proposed dates for 2021 State Review Board meetings. Michael?
So having concluded our 4 quarterly meetings for the year 2020 and anxious to put this year behind us, we need to schedule meeting dates for the next year, for 2021. In the draft agenda that I sent out, I identified 4 potential dates. They are Thursdays in March, June, September, and December. And from initial research that I did, I didn't see any obvious conflicts with those dates with anything else significant going on, but I'd like to have feedback from the board members on whether those dates are acceptable or whether there are major conflicts that would suggest we should move one or more of them. So I open it for discussion.
Okay, any board members with a recognized conflict with any of these dates?
Michael, could you refresh us, Carol, could you please refresh us on what dates they were in those months?
Yes. March 11th is the second Thursday in March. June 10th is the second Thursday in June. September 9th is the second Thursday in September. And December 9th is the second Thursday in December. I would note that the September meeting is the same week as Labor Day. It's 3 days after Labor Day that month.
Anybody with a recognized conflict at this time?
I would say the most important thing to do at this point is to approve the March 11th date. These dates going forward after that are always subject to change if something comes up, but we definitely need to plan on when the March meeting is.
Do I hear a motion to accept March 11th as our next State Review Board meeting?
I can't make it. It's Lucy. I'll be out of town.
Okay.
Well, I guess I could possibly join by Zoom, though. Yeah, I didn't think about that. I'm gonna be in
Yes, it's entirely possible that the March meeting will be another virtual meeting.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in that case, I'm going to be out of the state, but that would not preclude my joining, I guess, with the time zone.
Mr. Chair, this is Wayne. I'd make a motion to accept March 11th as the next meeting date.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Anyone opposed?
I'm sorry, who was that second? Was that Erica?
Erica, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And no one opposed or abstaining, so I think we have March 11th as our next meeting date.
I don't know what you're.
We need to set all of the dates for the year because we need to plan. Yeah, this is Kathy. I'm hoping that we can set all 4 dates at this meeting right now because my staff needs to plan accordingly and schedule things. So what about the other dates for the 3 other quarters? Is everyone good with those?
Understood. We absolutely appreciate your need to schedule this. So I will seek a motion to approve all 4 proposed dates for 2021 State Review Board meetings.
Could you just repeat those dates again?
It's March 11th, June 10th, September 9th, December 9th. All of those dates are the second Thursday of the month.
Mr. Chair, this is Wayne Goodman. I would amend my earlier motion to include all of those dates if that's agreeable.
Thank you, Wayne.
Doug, this is Kristen. I just have a quick question. I'm happy to move forward and vote on this, but because my own agency has not been able to essentially make plans for next year yet because of the moment we're in, I don't know 100% if I am available on all those dates because of my.
Yeah.
So is voting today just theoretically, like as of today, I'm comfortable with those dates, but I don't know what's going to happen as.
Yeah, I think that's the best we can do, and we have to just accept the fact that there may be people that can't make some of these dates, but will still probably reach a quorum. And so I think this is very similar to this sort of gut check position of scheduling that we get to each year. And I think we can tentatively approve these with a vote.
Okay, thank you. We usually have our dates by now. It's just unusual.
No, I think you're not alone in the uncertainty of the coming year.
In that respect, I can second it if you.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any opposed or abstained for accepting all 4 dates as listed in the agenda? All right, I think we have a schedule for 2021.
Thank you.
Is there any other business to address, new business? Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Clark, so moved.
Second.
Second.
Any opposed? All right, the meeting concludes at 12:45 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Talk soon.